I'd like to talk about the Japanese magazine, RM.
Right. Yes. That was fun. That happened probably a couple of years after, no, a few years after I'd started with Echoes. By the way, my first ever interview for Echoes was with Bunny Wailer.
Oh,
And
okay.
I thought I'd better be honest. And I said to him, I must tell you that this is the first interview I've ever done. And all he said was, you better make it a good one then. So, very encouraging. Yeah, in the early 90s, reggae was beginning to get really big in Japan. They started the Japan Splash and so on, and a lot of people were going over there for shows, and also people who were kind of overlooked really were big in Japan. It wasn't that they just went for the biggest names. They were very discerning in what they chose to celebrate. Like Janet Kay, for example, and some of the English lovers rock artists were very popular out there. So they asked me to do a lot of UK reggae type things, artists, which was a pleasure because those people really deserved more recognition than they got. And also dancehall. It was mainly UK reggae and dancehall artists that they were interested in. But with Echoes, we were covering everything and still do, whether it's ska, dub, dancehall, whatever it is. I mean, I've always considered reggae music as one culture, and these are all different parts of it. And I've never ever believed in segregating the music to it's got to be like this or it's got to be like that. Never. It doesn't have to be like anything. It is what it is as a package, whether it's gospel, reggae, lovers rock, dancehall, or gun lyrics, or whatever. And my introduction to it was people like came through people like Prince Buster, and he was doing, don't call me Scarface, my name's Al Capone, and hey, that was dancehall, and that was the first reggae I heard, and bought. And so when in the 90s people were coming up to me and say, oh, you shouldn't be writing about Ninja Man because um, reggae is the king's music, I couldn't accept that. That to me was being divisive, and I've never ever seen it like that. I mean, you mentioned the 90s, and I was going to Jamaica a lot in the 90s, and it was all fresh to me, and it was all exciting. And well, Jamaica's always exciting, but but I'd go to places like Penthouse, and you'd see Buja Banton, a young 19, 20-year-old with Marcia Griffiths. And, and that's when you realize this is all one music,
Yeah.
because the artists, they don't divide it up like that. And it's, yeah, and it was a time, the 90s, when um, Garnet Silk came along and Luciano, and so the roots and culture, there was an uprising of roots and culture. And at the same time, there were dancehall producers like Danny Brown at Main Street, same Penthouse, Shocking Vibes, Jammies, and so on, and that was incredibly exciting, incredibly creative. Taxi, and so I just I loved all of it. I loved whatever Bounty Killer was doing, and and the same with Tony Rebel or Garnet Silk or whatever. I mean, I mentioned Garnet Silk because he's the only artist I have ever met since Bob Marley that I thought could really become a global icon. And it was such a sad, sad day when he died. And it felt like a real piece of the music died with him. He was a very humble, spiritual person, but very determined. There was a real strength to him as well. And I'll never forget, I spoke to him on the Friday, and we'd arranged to speak on the Saturday, and we were going to put him on the front cover for Christmas. And he said, "Oh, I've got this show to do with Richie Stephens." He had this hit with Richie Stephens at the time. Can we make it Sunday instead? And I said, fine. And I rang him on Sunday, and the phone was disconnected, and weird. And this was his home phone, and I learned that he died in that fire the night before, and just very, very dark day for reggae music. I think you'll find a lot of people say that about him.
Yeah, Luciano said the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
First time I met him, Luciano, was with Castro Brown, and he had this place called New Name, and I knew Castro from Brixton. He was like the unofficial mayor of Brixton, and he was there in Jamaica, and I'd heard that Luciano was around, and so I went in there, and David Hines of Steel Pulse was sat behind Castro's desk, and I was saying, "An Englishman, what are you doing here?" And he asked me what I was doing, and I said I was looking for this guy Luciano, and I couldn't find him, and David was saying, "No, you don't want to mess with him, what do you want to with him for?" And I was saying, "No, I really like him." And there was this chubby guy with real short cropped hair sitting giggling in the corner, and that was Luciano, of course. I was set up, and but what a lovely person, and what a talent, but he was singing love songs then. He was mixing it up.
I know him and Castro Brown went way back, and another producer called Homer Harris.
Oh yes.
And then even with Freddie McGregor,
Absolutely.
his first hit was with Freddie.
Shake It Up Tonight.
Yeah.
Homer Harris used to be the manager for this place called Grove, rehearsal place, and it was where 8 or 9 band Dean Fraser and used to be based, and they backed everybody. So if you went there, you were going to meet the half of the Jamaican recording industry before long, So I used to love going there, and Homer had lived in England, and he'd had a stall in Brixton Market, so there was that UK connection, and I always remember Homer saying to me, "I want you to meet someone," and there was this schoolboy. I think he was 15, and he was in his school uniform, and he said, "This little youth here." We call him Sizzla. He's going to be the hottest DJ in Jamaica, which was a bold thing to say, at that time, right? This is like 93. And he had a book of lyrics. I only looked at them very briefly, and these lyrics were amazing for someone of that age. And the way he held himself, he was very determined and very confident of himself. And the next time I saw him, probably maybe a year later, he was in the Fatis camp. He was in the Exterminator camp. and he was still very much a junior member of that camp, but already doing songs like True God, and I thought he was an incredible talent. I still think he's an incredible talent, Sizzla. He changed the game. I mean, he brought something so new to reggae music at that time, and influenced so many people, not only in terms of his lyrics, which were so deep, but also that Sing J style, which was like a chanting and it was very melodic. He was outstanding, really outstanding. Well, the Exterminator, I don't know, I suppose it's like any place of work or area of work that you meet people who become more than just professional associates. You have a chemistry with people, and for some reason, from the minute I met Fatis, I felt very, very much at home with this man and with what he was doing. I could feel very much myself around him. I loved how he was with the music he made, because he would not cut corners. If he had to wait 2 months for a guitar player to come back off tour, that was it. No guitar would get done. He'd wait. And real perfectionist. There was such an aura of spirituality amongst that camp. And we're talking, I mean, at this time, the people in his stable were Luciano, Mikey General, Sizzla, Jesse Gender, Capleton, Beres Hammond, Ine Kamosi, I mean, Gregory Isaacs, Sanchez. I mean, incredible. And they all gravitated towards him. You would even get members of Third World passing through, and it was just he just drew all this talent to him like a magnet, and it was just a very strong, powerful thing. And his music, when you listen to it, has that spiritual vibe to it. And the musicians, they would be Sly and Robbie and Danny and Firehouse Crew, and they would create rhythms for him which embodied what he was all about, which was something really heavy, powerful, and profound. And that's another thing that amazes me about Jamaican musicians, is that the same set of musicians can play for 10 different producers, and what they will produce for each of those guys will be different from the next man. I mean, how do they do that? I mean, that's insane. And I remember asking Family Man Barrett one time, because he played with Yabby U and various people other than Bob Marley, and I'd say he wasn't all that book wise. So I'd say to him, when all these guys were reading the Maccabee Bible and studying scripture and so on, what would you be doing? And he said that he would be looking for the notes and the chords which resonated with what they were talking about. So he was finding the music to match their message, and my God, did he succeed? It's miraculous. It's such a wonderful music, reggae music. How does it do that? I was very privileged to be in the studio when people like Beres Hammond were there, like voicing for Fatis. And I remember we spent about 2 hours talking, and then about all sorts of things. And then he said, okay, time now, red light, and this song, fully formed, came out of the man's mouth. And there's nothing written on paper. And I've never seen Beres write anything down ever. I mean, how did these people do that? And I remember asking Luciano this one time, and he said, well, the melodies are up there like fruit in the trees, and I just picked them. This is insane. This is not human. It's a wonderful music. It's a wonderful culture.
Yeah, I always loved that era of Exterminator and what Bobby Digital was doing and everything and Penthouse. That was such a golden era.
Yeah. Actually, I was the last person to interview Panhead. And that was at the same Grove rehearsal place with Homer Harris. And the people who wrote the rough guide to reggae took my interview and used it and never credited me, but that was my interview. And Panhead was, although he did gun lyrics and he was very much a dancehall artist, where he lived in Mavali, he was very active in his community. He sponsored a local football team in that area, with the local youths, and he had a sound system. And he was deep into his culture. He was very keen scholar with the Bible. He often read the Bible, and he was definitely an influence on Bourdieu and and some of those other contemporaries of his. This was at a time when those artists were beginning to dread up and grow locks and do cultural lyrics. He was an unsung instigator of much of that. And the sound system, was really giving those local youths a chance to not only show their talent on the mic, but also, people building boxes or into electronics, and because sound system is like a village in itself. It's offering different opportunities, and he was very much aware of that. And as I heard it, the police took a dislike to him, and they were trying to close down his sound system. And there was some altercation with the police, and basically they killed him. And that's when Bourdieu did Murderer, and Capleton did Cold-Blooded Murderer. And it's just a great sadness. He was a big loss, even though he was unheralded as far as getting hits and big name recognition was concerned. He was just someone who was there, and if you were part of that scene, you knew him. Yeah, that's what I know about him, really. He came to London with Capleton, and pure gun lyrics. So it'd be very easy to discount him, but he had this whole other side to him.
I've noticed that about most artists who have done gun lyrics.
Yeah.
It's like it's one persona in their music, but then on a personal level, it's a completely different thing.
Absolutely. In fact, dare I say that in my experience, if you think about dancehall artists doing things for their communities, schools and so on, and you talk about Rasta artists doing things for their communities, quite often it's the dancehall artists who do the most for their communities. People like Movado, people like Bounty Killer, people like Baby Sham, it's this is how it is.
I can't really recall ever hearing a song of Panhead. I just know that
Mm.
he had a heavy influence on people like Buju and Capleton, you know.
I
Yeah.
think his influence was bigger than his name as an artist. I think it
Yeah.
would be fair to say that.
Hmm.
Yeah. I don't think he had an album out by the time he died. I don't think so. I think that came afterwards. But when I saw him at Grove, um, he was very close friends with Joseph Hill of Culture, and they were often together. They had a good friendship. So here you had this young dancehall artist into gun lyrics, and you you had the lead singer of Culture, one of the foremost roots artists, um, being very close, good friends.
With Fatis, I've only seen a very small interview of him. He wasn't really one who,
He didn't give interviews.
yeah.
He didn't. I mean, I'd asked him before. He'd always said no. And one time I was in Jamaica, and I'd asked, about him, if I could get a link with him, and it was one evening, and at a gas station, and this big black BMW pulled up alongside, and this guy I'd never seen before said, "John Masouri." And it's the sort of thing where if you say yes, you might get shot. And if you there's that split second, where you're not quite certain. Anyway, I said yes, and he said, "Follow me. Fatis wants to see you." And it's like, whoa, we're on. It's the last thing I was thinking of. So off we go, and we end up by Music Works. It was Music Works there at the time, and
Right.
there he was, and he said, "Oh, before we do the interview, I want you to have this." And he put a great big branch of herb in my hands. It was Beres Hammond was there, and a couple of other people were there, and I had one very small bud of this thing, and couldn't speak. And Fatis was watching me, and he said, "Okay, time for the interview now." This is the first time, we're doing this. And every single question I had for this man flew out of my head.
Oh,
It was no longer there. And I I got a 15-minute interview with him, which I've listened back to, and it was absolute rubbish. And the only thing I learned was that he was from Birmingham, and he wasn't from Jamaica at all, which very much amused me.
yeah.
Uh, and we were good friends from that moment. That was it. That was my initiation. I failed the test spectacularly. Maybe he had a lot to hide, um, but he didn't want to put himself out front. He didn't want to take the credit for anything. He very much ran that organization. He was very much the person in control, but he wasn't the sort of person who would demand attention and say, "I did this and I did that." Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I
Hmm.
still miss him, actually. And he had this uncanny ability of knowing when I was going to arrive in Jamaica, even before I'd bought the ticket. I don't know how he did it. Uh, no, he was a great character. He had a great sense of humor. You could talk to him about anything. He was very deep, and I still keep in touch, with his son Kareem. And it's hard with Kareem because I look at him sometimes and I see his father and I feel quite overcome. You know, it's he was a very special man, and I still think he was one of the best producers to ever come out of Jamaica.